Okay, this is Mike Franklin, the property tax guy, and today we're going to review more case examples on the website ptaxguy.com, also known as preparingforgrievanceday.com. They're the same. We're going to go into the case examples tab, and in the case examples, we have examples where I had handled various cases as a SCAR hearing officer. And I relay what transpired in those cases, so you can get a feel for what goes on in a SCAR hearing, and what the procedures are, and so on and so forth, and how you can expect the assessor to behave, and a property owner or their representatives to behave, and how the SCAR hearing officer, the state SCAR hearing officer, behaves. In this case, I was the SCAR hearing officer, so you can see how I handle the case. Then we have other ways that I help people address their property tax assessment situation is first to establish if your property is assessed fairly or not. Because there's no point challenging it if you're underassessed or fairly assessed. You just want to challenge if you're overassessed. But you need to establish objectively whether or not you are in fact overassessed. And we'll get to that in a minute. And the other things that I relay in case examples are what happens in an assessor level appeal when I help in an assessor level appeal, or if a property owner does it themselves. So you don't, and hopefully if you do an assessor level appeal, you can resolve it with the assessor directly without having to resort to SCAR or the Board of Assessment Review or even State Supreme Court. And if you lose if the assessor won't give you any satisfaction, then you have to, I have case examples of when I help people at the Board of Assessment Review, or what it is that people can do themselves at the Board of Assessment Review. And if you lose at the Board of Assessment Review, which I have many times, you can appeal to SCAR. Don't get discouraged if you lose at bar, and we'll get into that later. Then you can go to the Small Claims Assessment Review, which is before a state hearing officer, and you have an appeal option there. It costs $30, and I will have other videos that explain what happens in the SCAR case. So what I'm going to talk about today is helping property owners establish if they're fairly assessed. What they need to do is establish objectively, are they in fact overassessed? And one of the largest issues that we deal with in assessment is a lot of people are not certain of the difference between overassessed and high taxes. And New York State is known for its high taxes, but just because the taxes are high doesn't mean that you're overassessed. Whether or not you're overassessed is whether or not you are, your house is being assessed at more than what you sell it for. Is it assessed for more than fair market value? Or are other properties that are similar, comparable properties, assessed for less than yours? They don't necessarily have to be assessed at more than fair market value. They could be assessed at less than fair market value, but they're low compared to yours. In other words, you might be assessed at less than fair market value, but the comparable properties are assessed even less than that. So that means you're assessed unequally to other comparable property tax owners. So even though neither you nor they are at fair market value, you're not equal with them. And so it's not fair. You're paying too much versus what they're paying, because that's what it's about. It's having everybody pay their fair share. And sometimes the assessors are not up to date with what is fair market value. And that happens a lot because, the assessors have to deal with sometimes hundreds of properties, and it's a difficult task. And so, you can challenge based on excessive or unequal. So what you need to do is objectively analyze that. And so again, to understand the difference between a high assessment and high taxes, the high taxes are as a result of the budget of the town and the school. If the school has a professional football stadium for the kids, that costs a lot of money and the budget's high, for example. Or, whatever. The town budgets are voted on, and sometimes the budgets can be, absolutely enormous. And so how it's established, what it is that you pay, is the assessor attempts to establish the fair market value of all the properties in the township. And then they add them all up, and then they establish, a rate per thousand. So in other words, the value, your portion of the taxes will be your assessment divided by all the assessments combined together, and that generates a percentage. And then you multiply that times the budget, and that generates your tax. And so if you are able to get your assessment lowered, it doesn't mean that the town gets more money. It's not like the assessor is trying to squeeze more money out of you. The amount of money the town and the school receive is the same. It's just a question of how is the tax distributed amongst the property owners. And so if your assessment is lowered, the rest of the people in the township have to make it up. Or if your assessment is high, it means you're paying for the other people. And so the objective is equitable distribution of that tax burden. If everybody's property is accurately assessed at fair market value, then it's fair. But again, the town doesn't get more money or less money whether or not your assessment is higher or lower. It's the same. So a lot of people think the assessor is trying to squeeze money out of you. They're not. They're just trying to, their job is the equitable distribution of that tax burden. They don't want, other people paying your taxes or for you to pay other people's taxes. And they are, their job is to make that fair. And so what we need to do before we go talking to the assessor, before we go to the Bar Artist of Assessment Review, before we go to the Small Claims Assessment Review, before we go to State Supreme Court, we need to establish for ourselves whether or not that we are barking up the wrong tree. And so just objectively look at the comparable sales, the comparable assessments, and come to the conclusion. And so if you ask me to help you challenge your property taxes, before we make a deal for me to represent you, I'm going to analyze your property for free. And if I don't think you're overassessed, it's pointless to challenge when you're not overassessed. And also, when you challenge these assessments, the assessor is going to put whatever information they have in the file. And maybe next time they're going to raise your assessment because, you've demonstrated that you're underassessed, and so, if you're underassessed or you're properly assessed, leave it alone. You should aspire to pay your fair share. And I'm not interested in helping people who are trying to pay less than their fair share. The entire, I view my job when I help a property owner challenge their property taxes, I'm not an adversary of the assessor. I am helping the assessor come to a proper conclusion, to do the right thing, to secure equitable distribution of the tax burden. I don't help people try to pay less than what it is that they owe. And my success rate in helping people challenge their taxes is in excess of 90%. Is it because I'm so great at these things? Well, I'd like to think that I'm pretty good at valuation, but the reason I win more than 90% of the cases is because I don't take on cases where I'm in the wrong, because it's a waste of time and it's the wrong thing to do. And so, so my opinion is that the system is pretty good. The forms are needlessly complex. Sometimes the Board of Assessment Review, there could be local politics involved, and there could be issues, with that, and sometimes the SCAR hearing officers aren't perfect either. The SCAR hearing officer his job is an opinion of value, and it doesn't mean that he's right, but somebody has to make the call, and so that's they assign somebody who's a hearing officer who's either a lawyer, a former assessor, an appraiser, or a real estate broker, people who have expertise in valuing real estate. And so, so they're trying to get somebody to when the assessor and the property owner cannot agree, they have to have somebody who has some expertise make the call on what's fair and what's reasonable. And that's the job of a SCAR hearing officer. The SCAR hearing officer works for the state and is basically a check and balance on the Board of Assessment Review and on the assessor. And so, other than the overly complex paperwork and dealing with assessors and Board of Assessment Review, you're dealing with people, and people aren't perfect. They make mistakes. But overall, like I said, I've won in excess of 90% of my cases, and that's because I think the system is overall fair. It does take some practice and trial and error and experience to be able to put forth a proper argument. But in the end, if you have the data, pictures are always helpful, and your comparables, then you have a good chance of succeeding, 90+% chance of succeeding at one of the levels, so long as you are in the right. And that's the bottom line. So, I will, if you come to me for my help, I will look at your property and I will analyze it for free. And if you're overassessed, I'll let you know. And if you're underassessed, if you have a case, I'll let you know. And if you want, I'll handle it. Or if you just want some information on how to challenge it yourself, I'm happy to provide that. Either way. Again, this is Mike Franklin, the property tax guy, and that's one of the levels of challenging your taxes is to make certain that objectively that you are properly assessed, and you objectively understand what your property is worth, and that's an important first step in the process. Again, this is Mike Franklin, the property tax guy. PTaxGuy.com. Thank you.